My name is Joelle Panza, and I'm here today to talk to you about inclusivity with Apple accessibility. Let's start out with the basics and simply define what does accessibility mean. Accessibility is a word used to describe whether products, devices, services, or environments can be used by people of all abilities and disabilities. When a mobile app is accessible, it can be used by someone with a disability. Someone who is blind that uses VoiceOver to read content on an app out loud. Someone who is hard of hearing who turns on captions when they watch videos. Or even someone with a hand tremor who uses Assistive Touch software instead of their finger to tap on the screen. When coded correctly, mobile apps work for all of these people, but oftentimes apps are not coded with accessibility best practices in mind. And it's often an honest oversight. Nobody intends to exclude people with disabilities from using their app. Many developers were never even taught best practices for accessibility, or sometimes fixing accessibility issues is a goal pushed until later. Either way, people with disabilities are always affected. And at the end of the day, all they want to do is bank, shop, read the news, and connect with friends and family online, just like everybody else. The benefits of supporting accessibility in your app by far outweigh the extra time spent during development. Being accessible increases the number of people you reach. Estimates are that 1 in 5 Americans has a disability that affects their daily life. And as we are all very aware, technology has become a huge part of daily life. By following accessibility standards, you can help eliminate risk of legal action being taken against you or your company or your app. In 2019 alone, there were over 2,000 digital accessibility lawsuits filed, and that's an average of about 7 lawsuits per day. At the end of the day, being accessible is the right thing to do. Assistive technologies helps users with disabilities operate their Apple devices. All we need to do as developers is to ensure that we implement best practices and make their user experience as seamless as everybody else's. Now, I want to share a video that touches more on the broader topic of digital accessibility. However, I still found it to be super powerful, so I wanted to share this with you today.
I became a quadriplegic when I fell from a cliff at age 17. I'm paralyzed from the shoulders down. Just got off the trail, fell off the cliff, and that changed my life. Having a disability is very isolating. Technology has really allowed me to be an active participant in society. I've traveled in 44 countries and have done everything from skydiving to trekking to the base camp of Mount Everest. Accessibility to me is the difference between existing and really living.
I'm totally blind without light perception or anything else in either eye. I am a stay-at-home mom of 3 children. Technology has made a huge difference in my ability to live independently. I pretty much do all of the banking for our household. That was a big barrier for me when I first moved out of my parents' house, was getting the bills done. I'd have to get someone to read them to me. Right now, the mobile technology for banking is so awesome. You can see your balance, you can see your bank statements. When people create apps, if they don't go through the accessibility portion when they develop their app, then the app itself becomes inaccessible to VoiceOver. So that can be very challenging and frustrating because you think, I have this device, this application should work, everybody's using it, but I can't use this app.
To access websites, I use a trackball. The cursor's got to move a lot. I have to just keep rolling the ball and it gets tiring. If access is an afterthought, you can tell.
And I
to be independent. I like to do things myself rather than getting someone to do things for me. My name is Jessica and I am 25 years old. I lost my sight when I was 14 years old. When I lost my sight, I thought I will never be able to do things myself. But once I settled down a little, I learned about the technologies, about the computers. Since then, I became more confident. I have a talking scale, talking measuring jug, don't get lost, birthday present, a fruit note taker, note detector. I can access many things on my smartphone. It tells you whatever is saying on the screen, it will mean everything to me.
What started out as a desire to meet a fundamental customer need has actually become a real passion for everyone involved. For someone coming to our website, even with sight loss or hearing loss or some other physical disability that makes it hard to use websites, the experience should be seamless, easy to use.
Every time we create a new functionality or a new page, we'll listen through the page, make sure that what you can see is getting conveyed through the screen reader.
Making sure that all the copy on the page is picked up, that the colour contrast levels on the page meet the minimum requirements. What's been really good about the RNIB accreditation is that we're using people who are blind, who are partially sighted, to actually verify that the changes we've made work for real people. So it's a great honour.
Companies like Capital One trying to make it easier for everyone to access the site is incredible.
The ADA prohibits discrimination and ensures opportunity for people with disabilities in most facets of life. However, it was written before mobile checking, Amazon shopping, and streaming services ever existed. So really, there are no clear regulations, and that means tech companies and app creators need to step up to the plate. It's up to us to take responsibility to put our customers first. There are people out there who need us to think about accessibility and solve problems that can change their lives for the better. Digital accessibility is not only a technology problem. It's not a disabled-only problem. It's a human problem and deserves an equally human solution. Now, before I jump into the various solutions and tips and tricks I have for building an accessible app, I first want to touch on the history and show how far Apple has come with accessibility. From 2007 to 2009 is what I like to call the before times, when accessibility was not supported whatsoever within iPhones. It wasn't until June of 2009, towards the very end of WWDC keynote, in just under 40 seconds, Apple announced their first real accessibility features. And of the 4 new accessibility features announced, VoiceOver was the most important. Even though the mention of this was brief, it was groundbreaking stuff, because the power of assisted technology broke out and bridged the gap between a person's abilities and the digital content they want to access. For a blind person to use an iPhone, that bridge is VoiceOver. iOS 4 brought us Bluetooth keyboard capabilities, which meant blind users no longer had to struggle to type on the virtual keyboard. So now we'll move on to the fall of 2011, when iOS 5 was released. Face detection in the camera app made its debut. With VoiceOver on, if you point the device at someone, then VoiceOver will indicate how many faces the camera sees. Custom VoiceOver labeling was also added, allowing the user to give a label to a control in an app that the developer had not labeled. iOS 5 brought some pretty neat hearing features as well, like custom vibration patterns. Next up, in the iOS 6 release, Assistive Touch was the first iOS feature that supported people with motor delays. Guided access was also new to iOS 6 and restricted access to elements of iOS, for example, disabling buttons or preventing users from accessing certain apps. And this was super useful in the education system for autistic students. Another notable addition was the added actions for VoiceOver. Before this, something like flagging or deleting an email using VoiceOver was not even possible. iOS 7 introduced dynamic type, which allows users to choose the size of content displayed on the screen. In addition, accessibility settings was moved up as a prominent feature. Previously, it was at the very bottom of general settings. iOS 11 was the first iOS release to support Face ID. However, some people with disabilities, particularly those who are blind, were not able to use the feature. So iOS added a toggle that allows the phone to unlock without requiring eye contact. Then in the fall of 2018, the Live Listen feature was extended to AirPods. This allows people to use their phone's microphone to assist in hearing better. Moving right along to iOS 14 release, when sound recognition was highlighted as a real game changer, showing a notification when it hears common sounds like a fire alarm, a siren, or even a baby crying, which is meant to help deaf users be aware of sounds they may need to react to. Fast forwarding to current day, Assistive Touch for Apple Watch stole the show. It allows users with limb differences to enjoy the benefits of Apple Watch without ever having to touch the display by simply pinching or clenching their hands or fingers. This timeline is a representation of the progression of accessibility features in iOS. It is only going to become more important as we move forward. Now on to some helpful tips and tricks for building a more inclusive iOS app. First and foremost, bring the lens of accessibility to any new project you start. Accessibility needs to be considered early and often throughout the entire development life cycle. By designing your app with accessibility in mind, you make it possible for everyone to enjoy it. Accessibility is truly a mindset, and as iOS developers, we need to shift towards adopting accessibility as part of the way we develop and deliver software. Not a nice to have, but a must have. Not lower priority, but the right thing to do. Not built first and fixed later, but built right from the get-go. This was actually a huge takeaway from the first feature that my team delivered within the Capital One iOS app. We were so excited because from our perspective, we thought that we were crossing the finish line, everything looked good, everything functioned correctly, again, from our perspective. And it wasn't until we took our feature through the internal accessibility review that we realized there was still a ton of work to be done. There were several accessibility findings that we had to remediate. And in order to do so, we ended up having to re-architect several pages within our feature. And it was a ton of rework. Had we had thought about accessibility from the get-go, we would have saved ourselves so much time in the long run. Vision, hearing, physical and motor skills, and learning and literacy are the accessibility domains to keep in mind when thinking about your users. Next up, start UI testing. XUI tests are great for accessibility because that's exactly what they're testing. Very similarly to assistive technologies, these tests need something machine readable to understand what's present on the screen. XUI reads the accessibility tree, the hierarchy of metadata and labels that represent assistive technology to assistive technology, what is on the screen. Therefore, any well-written XUI test is an accessibility test. You'll want to ensure your tests are checking accessibility and references elements by their labels wherever possible. Sometimes it is easier to find elements on the screen by referencing their index or identifier, but be sure to check the element's label once you've found it. Next up, it is super important to be mindful of the order of elements for the best user experience. The order of elements should be set in a way that makes sense when VoiceOver reads them aloud. VoiceOver will automatically read elements from left to right and top to bottom, but this order doesn't always make sense to the user. Sometimes you need to manually set the order of elements for a particular screen. For example, if you want a description read before an action item like a button, you can use accessibility elements or set the accessibility sort priority to direct VoiceOver to read the description first. The new accessibility panel within Xcode 13 is something I can't wait to start using. I haven't made the leap to Big Sur yet, but I can't wait. Once I do, this is like the first thing I'm going to start playing with, because it's going to make testing and debugging accessibility so much easier. Previously, we were pretty much limited to testing VoiceOver and the order of elements manually on a physical device, because the accessibility inspector within Macs just is not reliable. Not only does this panel show you the value of the label that VoiceOver will read, but it also lists the elements in the order that VoiceOver will read them, which is game-changing. Large containers do help. Typically, the way we as developers think about navigating between fields with VoiceOver is to swipe left or right. However, blind users often browse the screen by running their fingers around to discover everything that's on it, but accessibility information is easy to miss when it's contained within a small view. So to help users find information easily, consider implementing a larger container. Without the correct usage and placement of commas, VoiceOver can sound incoherent. So when you're creating accessibility labels, use commas to break up long strings of text. This way, VoiceOver will read more like a human and add pauses in between words. It's also worth noting that capitalizing the first character in an accessibility label allows VoiceOver to read the label with the correct inflection. Now I'm going to show a quick little demo of VoiceOver reading labels with and without commas, and it's quite obvious which is the better user experience.
VoiceOver on, vinyl, favorite albums, heading. Because the internet, Childish Gambino. Because the internet, Childish Gambino. Fez disasterpiece. Fez disasterpiece.
Clearly, the right column is a much better experience and just easier to digest. Last, but certainly not least, group elements for effortless navigation. In this example, these albums are in a collection view, and we are setting the collection view cell as the accessibility element. And what this does by default is it will set its children, everything within the collection view cell, to not be an accessibility element. And what this achieves is when VoiceOver is enabled, it will focus on the entire cell versus each individual label or image or whatever you have within your cell. Something else I wanted to note in this example is the proper use of the accessibility hint, because it's not quite obvious that if you were to tap on an album, that would play a song. So it's very helpful in this case. However, if there were another button within this same music app that was a play button, you would not need to use an accessibility hint in that scenario, because it's pretty obvious if you're in a music app and there's a play button that a song will play if you tap it. Now I'll do another quick little demo showing VoiceOver reading grouped and ungrouped elements on the screen.
Vinyl, favorite albums, heading. Because the internet, Childish Gambino. Fez. Disasterpiece. Happy Feet. Various artists. Playing with scratches. Ruckus Roboticus.
You can see that's quite cumbersome, having to go through 2 labels on each album just to go through the
VoiceOver
whole
on,
list.
vinyl, favorite albums, heading. Because the internet, Childish Gambino. Double tap to play. Fez Disasterpiece. Happy Feet, various artists. Playing with scratches, Ruckus Roboticus.
The second example is without a doubt a much better experience and much more easy to navigate for the user. So those are my helpful tips and tricks. I really hope you enjoyed my presentation today and found it to be beneficial and digestible. Before I wrap up, I wanted to bring it full circle and share this quote that I thought would be perfect to end it on. The one argument for accessibility that doesn't get made nearly often enough is how extraordinarily better it makes some people's lives. How many opportunities do we have to dramatically improve people's lives just by doing our job a little bit better? I'll end on that note, and I appreciate everyone's time. Those with questions or thoughts on the topic, please use this session Slack channel, and I'll try and answer as many as I can. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And now I'm going to hand it off to Eric, who is going to be talking about virtual reality.